Law enforcement versus ordinary people who are concealed carrying firearms protected by the Second Amendment. Who is more effective at stopping bad guys, at stopping evil, whether they're the victim of it or whether they're just trying to help out a third person? In this video, we're gonna be exploring some very, very interesting statistics, and there's gonna be a really shocking one I'm gonna drop right at the end, of course, so be sure to stick around. Guys, cops versus citizen carriers, who wins? Let's get into it. So first up, let's talk about civilian defensive gun use. How often do regular folks actually pull the trigger when facing a deadly threat? One of the latest research studies paints a reasonably clear picture. In about 90%, yes, 90% of the cases studied that only looked at incidents that make it to police reports or the media, defenders fire their weapons. Now, this comes from an in-depth analysis of some 418 cases via the Gun Violence Archive. That's going to be linked down in the description box down below, which tracks real-world events where guns come into play defensively. You heard me say that about 80 to even 90% or more of the time, the mere act of displaying a gun in self-defense is enough to scare off the bad guy. That is correct. I'll explain the difference as well as drop a genuinely shocking statistic towards the end of the video, so stay tuned. When civilians do fire their guns, their effectiveness is bluntly impressive. Perpetrators get hit in 75% of those incidents, with an average of about 0.75 attackers shot per event. Now that's across 418 cases, which means 315 bad guys got diagnosed with a sudden onset of lead exposure. On a per bullet basis, per shot basis, civilians connect with about 23 to 30% of their shots. That's roughly, for those of you who are math impaired, about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 rounds finding the mark, give or take. Why so low, you might be asking? Well, look, coming from an ex-state prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, let me tell you, real life isn't a shooting range. Adrenaline dumps, targets moving erratically, sometimes shooting back. Split-second decisions rule. Divided attention frequently common. Plus, civilians typically fire just 2 to 3 rounds total. More than one shot happens in only 36% of cases. So according to this study, about 64% of the time, a defensive gun use where shots are fired is a one-shot event. It's quick, it's close, and it's over fast. Following that rule that you may have heard, the rule of the threes, the mantra from self-defense experts, 3 shots, 3 yards, 3 seconds. Now, something that caught my eye when reviewing these statistics from this study, as well as some other ones that are out there, again, all linked down in the description box down below, are that civilians seem to shoot almost with the intention of hitting the bad guy once. Then they stop. You're going to see why I think that in a moment. But first, let's check in on what law enforcement is up to. All right, so shifting gears to police officers, the trained guardians that society broadly relies on to rein in the violence and hold the evil at bay. Their world is different. And likewise, so are their statistics. When officers discharge their weapons, they hit suspects around 54% of the time, compared to 75% of civilians. And this is based on a detailed Dallas Police Department study of about 149 shootings. What's their accuracy rate? It ranges quite a bit, from about 18 to 44%, averaging about 35%. For some additional perspective, New York Police Department, NYPD, clocked about 44% in 2017 and 35% in 2016. So these are not worlds apart from civilians, but there's also a little bit more variability since a lot of these statistics are based on individual police departments. Keep in mind, a lot can be different in a dynamic urban environment versus a wide open suburban or rural environment as well. So why these differences? Police engagements are frankly diverse. They sometimes include, as I already mentioned, longer distances than a civilian self-defense use. Again, going back to that 3 yards. Notably as well, law enforcement fired more rounds 3 to 8 on average per incident, compared to 2 to 3 for civilians, with 53% of officers using 3 or fewer rounds in some studies. So let's start tying some things together, because the comparisons reveal some profound truths. Civilians boast a higher incident level hit rate of 75% of the time the attacker gets hit when a civilian starts pulling the trigger, versus a police where we're at 54%. But the civilian per shot accuracy is marginally lower at between 23 to 30% versus the officers at about 35%. Both groups struggle with the same harsh reality. Under extreme stress, only between 20 to 40% of the bullets will hit home. And I will note, I've seen studies that put these hit rates for police officers actually much lower. I'm going on this study this time. If you want me to take a look at more studies, let me know down in the comment field below. Now, civilians benefit as well from closer ranges, about 3 to 9 feet, as well as maybe surprise elements, while police face broader, more unpredictable scenarios. Put into English, everyone knows that a cop is armed, and if you start sending bullets downrange at them, you're probably going to start taking some back. A civilian who maybe is concealed carrying may be much more likely to catch an attacker flat-footed and nearby, which in turn may help feed that higher incident hit rate. Also, the fact that maybe a bad guy is more inclined to stop shooting and surrender to a cop who is trained to stop firing more, maybe that weighs into it as well. I don't know. Maybe bad guys are less likely to surrender to a civilian than a cop. Digging even deeper into the statistics, cops shoot a bad guy closer to, on average, twice per incident, compared to an armed citizen who, if you look at these rates, tends to only hit the bad guy once. This disparity raises, to me, some interesting questions. Are these the results driven by different training approaches? Police are more often drilled to fire until the threat is neutralized, leading to more rounds expended and potentially multiple hits on a single target to ensure that the job of saving their life or someone else's life is done. Civilians, lacking that formalized training and mindset and discipline, might stop after the first effective shot or simply fire fewer rounds due to the shortness and briefness of their encounters. It could also be, and I think this one might be it, comes from a mindset. Officers are conditioned for prolonged engagements where they understand that even if they score hits, that is far from a guarantee that the fight is over. While citizens, brainwashed by Hollywood and the media, think every shot and every hit will get the one-shot stop. If you want a whole deep dive into one-shot stop statistics, let me know down in the comment field below. I can do a deep dive on it. I've got a treasure trove of information that, if you're interested, I'd be excited to share it. Let me know. Either way, this seems to speak to and highlight how likely training and mindset, not just accuracy, inform what happens in these dynamic environments. When you don't have time to think, you only have time to act. This data also debunks some anti-gun myths that people like to throw out there, that armed citizens who conceal carry are just cowboys, emptying magazines, going back to the pickup truck, picking up 10 more loaded magazines, and just going to town. No, they're often highly effective in dire moments, and perhaps arguably even more effective than law enforcement, noting that they need about half the rounds to achieve a higher hit count, even though the hit rate is lower. I know. But it also underscores a universal challenge. Again, hitting the target in a life or death scramble is tough for both professionals and civilians alike. So now let's reconcile some data that I teased upfront and drop that statistic. I mentioned at the upfront that this particular study goes into the fact that 90% of the time, civilians, when they're producing their guns in self-defense, are using them. But elsewhere, you've also heard me say that 80 to even 90% plus of the time, the mere display of a firearm without even shooting it is enough to end the attack. They can't both be right? Special treat for you guys hanging around. It boils down to basically how we collect the data. And this is going to be interesting. Surveys like those that put together the number closer of 80 to 90% or higher of the time when you use a firearm in self-defense, the bad guy runs away and you don't have to pull the trigger, are usually self-reported stories to surveys. If true, that would mean that the overwhelming majority of time, there's often no 911 call, no police involvement, and certainly no headlines. I can tell you, as a criminal defense attorney whose firm handles between 10 and 20 self-defense firearm cases at any one point in time. That checks out. We get a lot of calls from people who never called the police and had to sometimes shoot, but usually just, and by usually I mean 90% of the time, merely display their firearm. So anecdotally, to me and my sample size, that all checks out. So what's going on in this study? Well, this study's only looking at cases that have basically attracted media attention and all that kind of stuff. Those cases tend to be the larger cases. How do we reconcile this? Who's right? Because anti-gunners say, well, look, see, 90% of the time when a civilian pulls out a gun, they wind up shooting someone. I'm going to leave you with this. In my home state of Wisconsin, our largest city called Milwaukee, has something called shot spotter technology installed in some of the rougher areas around town. Now, these are listening devices that capture and report gunshot incidents. If you cross-sect those recorded gunshot incidents with the number of 911 calls that go out for, hey, we had a shots fired incident. In other words, what percentage of the time when shots are fired does it actually get called into police? What do you think? Is it 100% of the time? Is it 50% of the time? 25% of the time? Yeah, 3.6% of the time. That was in 2023. Yeah. Well, unlike most cases that authorities never learn about, the Gun Violence Archive, on the other hand, again, only focuses on the verifiable reports. So only when police showed up, and that tends to happen more when the good guys fight back. And if anything here blew your mind, be sure to drop a comment down below. Let me know if you want those one-shot stop statistics. If you find that interesting, I know I found that actually pretty interesting. And they range by caliber and all that kind of stuff. So go ahead, let me know if you're interested in that. Let's get to our ever popular quote of the day. This one comes from one of my best friends, at least if you can make friends through reading books, retired Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who said this: "Our life is what our thoughts make it." That's right, because the only thing that controls what you think about something is you, no matter how good or bad it is. I appreciate you sticking around. Hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.